Well, joining me is Paul Craine here. Paul, every time you send me an email, I go, wow, because you go through data, you sift out the chaff, shall we say, from the other stuff that's going on here. We're referring to basically how the Isle of Man government and the press office people have been issuing more good news, saying everything's looking good, we've got an increase in people here, based on GPs. Now, I know we've done this before, and you say that's just not good enough. You need to use more resources, more data sources. So over to you. I mean, you've this latest survey that you've done through this. What's it showing?
Okay, it's not so much a survey. It's information from a different government department, if you like. Yes, I have said that in the Isle of Man's population is vulnerable. We're vulnerable to ageing, to young adults leaving, to a range of things happening that makes us vulnerable. And I've said it's really important that we should be monitoring the population as closely as we can, and that the current method of doing that, producing quarterly population estimates, is good. It's based on something solid, the number of people registered with GPs, but that's not enough on its own. That you need to supplement that, to triangulate that, to have other sources of data that you're putting together.
Because the GP thing is showing that there's an increase in people on the lists, therefore there's an increase in the population. Is that
right?
Basically it?
Indeed, the number of people registered with GPs was one of the indicators prior to 2016 of the population falling, because the number of people registered with GPs dropped from 2013 downwards, but then has risen again since. It's a slightly difficult figure because the government applies a constant to relate the number of people registered with GPs to the actual population. So there is this constant involved, makes it a little bit more complicated. But this week we've seen completely new data coming out from the schools. Every September, all the schools can put their information into the Department of Education, Sport and Culture, indicating what the school rolls are at the start of the new school year. And those figures had been rising very, very, very slowly, much more slowly than the estimated population based on GPs. But indeed, in the last 12 months, they've fallen. So our current position would be, if we look, what I'm looking at specifically is, if you take the years 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in 2016, just after the last census, September 2016, and you look at what's happened to them as they have moved on to become years 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So this is still within the compulsory school age. It's the same group of students. They were in those years in 2016. They're now in these years in 2020. And the 6,300 of them passing through here, the numbers are up just 12. Now, the numbers of people registered with GPs is up by over 1,000. So that has led to the belief that the population is growing again. We're almost back to the population we had in 2011, but not quite. But it's an estimate based on the number of people registered with GPs. The GP registers actually fell by over 60 in the second quarter this year, between end of March and end of June. So they've shown a slight fall. But here the school figures, that 4 years and no rise of 12, 0.19%. It's a tiny amount out of 6,000, a rise of 12. But between September 2019 and September this year, the numbers fell by 26, which is 0.4%. That's a bigger number. So when you do look beyond just what the doctors' lists are telling us, and you take another source of information, school roll information, that evidence doesn't match the evidence that's being used by government to produce the estimated population.
So, as you said, you need more than one data stream to really work out what's going on. And why doesn't the government do this? I mean, they're very good at producing these figures.
Well, I'm pleased really that we get some estimate, because until the Isle of Man Population Atlas came out in 2016, we didn't have estimates we waited for the census. And I argued the case when the book was published in April 2016 that this could be built into the quarterly come-in reports, that they've got information on the doctors, for example, and I mentioned school rolls as well. And in fairness, they did start doing it. They have started producing the data, so we can see what's happening to the doctors' rolls, but they haven't broadened it. And I think that's crucial. Indeed, it would be good to have any other sources of information about people in employment, people paying tax, any other sort. In Jersey, they've actually done away with the interim census, the middle census. They are going to have one next year, I understand, but they're producing annually a report, comes out each June, and it covers the previous year, where they've considered all the evidence that they've got on population and reached figures and more detailed figures broken down by age groups.
Figures
and
you
so
can
on.
trust better anyway, or seem to, because every time I've interviewed you, every time I think you've always been worried that the population is nowhere near where we think we are, and it's pretty well aging and declining. I don't put words in your mouth. Would that be a fair?
I don't think it's declining at the moment.
Static.
Maybe static. The number of people registered with doctors is a good source of information. When we had the population decline running up to 2016, the number of people registered with doctors was going down. The numbers in the schools were going down. The things were matching up. The things were lining up, and you could see the different indicators. Work permit applications were falling. All of these things going together. At the moment, we seem to have contradiction between the data.
I bring this up because literally tomorrow, we're recording this on Monday, isn't the Eastern Plan being discussed in Tynwald, or this Tynwald session? I mean, there's going to be potentially more houses being built because the population is going up. That's again, is that how I read this?
That's true. That's not why I produced this. I've produced this and put it on my website.
But the government needs to know where it's going because of population trends, right?
I've produced it because the data's new out. Okay, I got permission on Friday, I think, to make use of the data, and I've worked on it and produced things. So, I'm trying to keep up to date on where we're at with.
Being very diplomatic here, I know. One of those things you have to do. But do you think someone somewhere should just be thinking, should we just double check all these numbers? Is the population heading in this? Was it 1,000 potentially more houses or something? I think Eastern Plan. I can't remember now. Something like that.
Yes, the Eastern Area Plan, I think, is coming up in Tynwald this week. The islands planning. I get very involved in the sense, using the censuses, not producing them, using the census. I get very involved in that, and I think that to get maximum value out of a census, it really should be guiding your planning. So when we've had the Island Strategic Plan and the Area Plan for the East, they have frequently used data that they've been using the 2011 projections, and they carried on using those, and they only readjusted after last year's inquiry, I think, that took place, and said that no, those projections are now out. We need to use more recent figures, but the expected number of additional houses that we'll need in the eastern area, they're still using the higher figure, although some of the housing has been moved to a reserve list. When the broad figures there, I do have concerns about that. But
well, there's going to be a new survey next year when that's back on, right? I mean,
the census, yes.
Yeah, because we never knew where we were.
That.
Secondly, to be fair to government, we've had all sorts of people talking, especially state agents, but then they probably would always say things are looking good. But there has been these sort of stories going around that because we're so in the situation we are in with the COVID-19, that the Isle of Man's suddenly become more interesting, but we'll see if that translates, I suppose.
We will have to see, because if you take the figures, the only figures that we've got, and I'm keen to know how our current COVID position, how that will affect numbers. You hear all sorts of anecdotes about people who've gone away from the hospitality sector, and others who've maybe come in because they've got families or elderly and they want to get here. But if you look at what the data's saying at the moment, it's over the 12-month period, the numbers in these groups in schools, the same students, they've dropped by 26 in the 12 months, and the number of people registered with doctors dropped by over 60 in the second quarter this year. That's March through to June. there's no evidence of moving on. And what the estate agents are saying, I think, is that, look, an awful lot of this movement is within the Isle of Man. It's people, it's investment in property in the sense of people buying houses to let, and it's people moving. One estate agent that I communicated with talked about people who in lockdown decided that they really needed to have another study or something different about their premises, so they were looking to move. And so yes, it's been referred to as a mini housing boom, but an awful lot of that is within the island. And
that's probably just to finish with, the thing is, you hear one thing, but one thing you see is data,
yeah.
But you just want more data. I mean, if you had the pick, what would you have? Everything released all the time, would you? Is that what you need to really know where we're going?
I think it would be. It's not so much having it released, because I've got here now the school roll data that's available.
Did you ask for
got
it?
The number of people. I do ask for it.
I mean, would it be released otherwise? I mean, or is it pushing on the door? Maybe, I don't know.
The quarterly population estimates from government didn't appear in the Comyn report for June, because the economic recovery group are getting a dashboard of data differently, so the data was no longer going to be published. But when I asked for it with some concern that this data wasn't coming, I got it immediately, so it was available. And the data from the schools, yes, they've sort of said, yes, that's available data, so I was given that.
We'll keep watching this space and keep reporting. Thank you.
Okay, all right, thanks, Paul.